So, hello and welcome. I'm Jane Hamburger. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Larimer County, not for women only. So we're so glad to have you all here. It's my pleasure to welcome you and to welcome you to an extraordinary monthly meeting. I want to especially include and welcome our Zoom audience, along with you in-person audience, a combined audience of 228 people. And they're all interested in Camille's story of the story of a black mother's garden. So thank you for joining us. Let me tell you a little bit about the League. I understand there's quite a few of you here who are not members, but there's always the wannabes, right? So the League is a nonpartisan organization. We do not support any political party or candidate. However, we are political. Teams of us, and we are the largest league in Colorado. There's about 270 of us, and we divide ourselves into teams to educate and advocate on positions we have carefully studied and adopted over our 104 years history. And on Valentine's Day, we'll be 104 years old. So. For example, of our teams, tonight's program is sponsored by our Environmental Action Team and its Pollinator Habitat Group. It's a very busy group. Busy as bees. The positions that guide us to environmental action are in the broad natural resources category. If you had time to visit the tables around the room, you would see just some of our other teams who are active in Larimer County in Colorado. With our voter services team, they're at the back to register you and to find out more and get educated about the process. Colorado has the gold standard for the voting process, so it's worth the study and worth participating in for a lot of reasons. You can join at our membership table. They're at the back, where you can find your interest in teams of government and election reform, a team of international relations, one for natural resources, and social policy. And that's divided into several teams, such as our healthcare team, civil liberties, news access and literacy, and affordable housing. By the door, we are over here. We are offering you the choice as you leave to sign the petition that would place on the ballot for a Colorado Constitution amendment to protect the right to an abortion in Colorado. So you can sign and they'll be there to take your signature. We have lots of volunteer leaguers to thank tonight. Kathy Marr and Kathy Wilson, FC Public Media, and Jory Kramer, who handled the technology for us and for our hybrid presentation. You know, this is not an easy process, this hybrid process, and so we studied, and Kathy went to one of the places that advertised they teach you how to do hybrid meetings, and they couldn't get it to work. So, so we're kind of glad that it seems to be working tonight. We haven't heard from them, so. We have lots of volunteer leagues to thank tonight. And in addition to Kathy, the Kathys, and FC Public Media, and Jory Kramer, we'd like to thank Vicki McLean, who is our retiring Environmental Action Team leader, and would also like to acknowledge with respect and appreciation that the land we are on today is the traditional and the territory of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, Ute nations and peoples. We recognize the indigenous people as original stewards of this land. As these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, the ties these nations have to their traditional homelands are appreciated, and we're glad to be here and be stewards of the land. And a huge thank you to our pollinator habitat leader and the board's DEI and outreach coordinator, Cindy Felter. Yeah. Cindy had the inspiration for tonight's presentation and the planning abilities to make it happen. And look at you all. You made it and found a chair, and we have refreshments. That's great. Cindy, it's just a great job. So, here to tell you about tonight and our special guest is Cindy. Thank you for coming. Thank you to the Zoomers, and stay tuned. It's going to be great.
Thank you. I want to go over just a couple logistic points. Following Camille's presentation, she will be doing some question and answers for us. The in-house people noticed cards on their chairs when they came in and some pens. You can write your questions on there and then pass them to the outside aisles. We have Mary and Jory that will be collecting them during the presentation and following. For our virtual audience, please include your questions in the chat room, and we have a chat wrangler on site that's going to pick up your questions, so we will be able to hear from you as well. Tonight, we are honored to have Camille Dungy. She is a multi-award-winning poet and an acclaimed essayist and critic. Professor Dungy is the author of 4 collections of poetry, most recently, Trophic Cascade, winner of the Colorado Book Award. She is author of 2 essay collections with her forthcoming Soil, the Story of a Black Mother's Garden. She writes, whether a plot in the yard or pots in the window, every politically engaged person should have a garden. We should all take some time to plant life in the soil. Please help me welcome our very own Fort Collins Distinguished Professor from CSU, Camille Dungy.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you everybody who came out tonight and all of you on Zoom. This is an interesting experience, I have to say, because writing this book, just scribbling ferociously in little 20-minute segments while I was homeschooling my daughter during the pandemic, to anticipate the degree of connection that I've been able to make with so many people about these ideas that are clearly important to a lot of us has been really, really touching, right? So remember how isolated that all felt, that we were just by ourselves, talking to nobody, and I guess that wasn't true. So, thank you. I thought that today what I would do is read a couple parts of Soil. Start at the start. That always seems a good place to begin, to just introduce you into some of the thinking that went into it. And then eventually, as we said, I'll open up into questions. And then maybe sometimes in order to answer a question, I might just find a part from the book where I already wrote the answer to be able to explain it, and sometimes I'll talk off the cuff. I hope you can hear me. Raise your hand in the back if you can't. I'm at the tail end of influenza A. I don't think I am contagious anymore, but I was wearing the mask just as in case. But I just, this is about as loudly as I can talk, so I'll scooch up closer to the microphone if you need it. I'm getting thumbs up in the back there. All right. I sat in my realtor's Lexus while she toured me around Fort Collins, Colorado during the waning weeks of May 2013. At that time of the year, I know now, flurries from cottonwoods fill the northern Colorado sky. Fluff gathers in yards and along the road's margins like snowdrifts. Apple trees, mountain ash, hawthorns, choke cherries, all their white petals fall onto sidewalks, pile onto windshields. Neighborhood by neighborhood, petal-strewn curbs whiz by the car windows, disorienting me. All that whiteness swirled around us, and I wondered what I was getting my family into. I thought that by May, Colorado would be heading into summer. Silly me. But the wide-flung whiteness made me think the cold of winter might be all this town could offer me. My shoulder-length black locks and the realtor's brunette waves swayed in and out of each other's side views. We never got out of the car. I didn't want to look closely at anything yet. Later that summer, my husband Ray and I would come back and choose a house to buy. On this trip, I just wanted the lay of the land. Fort Collins is a long hour's drive from the northern edge of Denver, and just 30 minutes south of Wyoming's wide open rangeland. The American plains spread behind us as we drove. Jagged granite peaks of the Rocky Mountains loomed ahead. I'd arranged the real estate tour because I planned to accept a job that would transplant my New York City born and raised husband and our 3-year-old daughter, Callie, from Oakland, California. This was a final chance to see if it felt safe to move my family to a state where I had been born, but where I hadn't lived since I was a toddler. For more than 140 years, Fort Collins has grown around its university and old town center like rings of a tree. Every 2 decades or so, a new ring raises subdivisions from the surrounding farms and ranches and the remaining grassland prairies. The town's steady growth meant we could afford to own a house with a yard, leaving behind the rented apartment that overextended our budget in Oakland. The university offered me a position as a full professor and a secure teaching position for Ray as well. The community's respect for education meant an accessible system of high-quality public schools for our daughter. All these possibilities excited me. I wanted a home where our family could stretch out and root down in peace. But I had to figure out what was going on with that white mess all around me. Was I going to suffer teary eyes and headaches thanks to all the shedding cottonwoods? Would my allergies flare in this environment? Were those fallen ash petals going to be a hassle to clean up? And what about the people in this predominantly white town? Would they welcome our Black family? My mind worked as it wondered. I looked to understand this place's disposition based on evidence of my interactions and the history of others' interactions with the living world. Carrying with it seed looking to grow a new tree, cottonwood fluff can travel on the wind for up to 20 miles. As May unfolds into June here, the ash's white petals will finish. The hawthorn petals, the choke cherry buds, and the apple blossoms too. The tree will go green, leafed out for a new year, gorgeous in their own ways. What fruits come in place of the petals will welcome birds who'll take berries for themselves and also to feed their young. birds who set up nests sometimes, or sometimes just settle for a moment's rest. I have to stay in one place long enough to see it, but there is promise all over when I look. At our tour's end that late spring day, the realtor asked me, "Where do you think you want to live?" I've been working to answer that question ever since. So we ended up buying a lovely late 80s house in the sort of south side area of town near Lopez Elementary School. I love the house. I felt like when we did the tour, it was the only house where my husband walked the perimeter of the whole house and like went up and down the street, which to me, he has some guard dog tendencies, my husband, and and it felt like it was a sign, you know, like he sort of was trying to check out the territory, and I felt this sort of like this is what a house is supposed to be. Feeling when I entered it. I then later realized in terms of the interior decor that some of it was because it looked a lot like the house I grew up in 1986 still. So I had to do some work inside. And outside, the yard had this incredible uniformity, which having come from the Bay Area was just really, really difficult my first winter. Because it was just gray. That was it. It was like gray grass and gray rocks. And then like a sort of grayed down juniper tree, you know? That was it. And so right away I thought, I've got to figure out how to make something more vibrant in this space. And I worked bit by bit at creating a native landscaping that like comes up much earlier and stays up and just becomes more engaging. Really, it was just selfish, you know, like we could talk about the pollinators and all those things. It's true. I'm glad I'm helping them. But I was just gonna die from boredom. Looking out at that landscape all the time. So then I would just get these ideas, you know, and I would decide what we're gonna do now is start this little project in this part of the yard or this little project in this part of the yard. And sometimes I think the project through and talk to other people, and sometimes I didn't. One October morning, 6 years after that tour in my realtor's Lexus, a large white truck dumped 7 cubic yards of shredded cedar mulch to cover our driveway. Then the truck dumped another 7 cubic yards of compost-enriched topsoil onto the street in front of our house. The Wednesday the soil and mulch arrived was not a calm day. Since the weekend, wind had blown at rates of up to 40 miles an hour. Drastic weather changes here kick up a barometric fuss. The night before, our house shook in gusts more than once. Fallen leaves blew everywhere and gathered with dust motes and stray trash in crevices around our porch and patios and shrubs. Such winds come to Colorado to warn us that though the day rose warm, by nightfall, our yards could be blanketed in snow. That October Wednesday was not the ideal day to open our home to many hundreds of dollars worth of soil. Why couldn't they deliver it on Friday? Ray asked a few days before the truck arrived. Because Wednesday is the day it is coming, I said. Set on completing the first steps in our yard project before Halloween, a week away, when costumed and sugar-crazed kids would crawl through our neighborhood, I hadn't considered the wind. I simply called the landscaping supply company to arrange delivery, and the delivery was there. Ray and I danced around the mound in the street, trying to protect our soil from the wind. Our friend Tim stopped by briefly on his way to deliver a jacket to his daughter at the nearby elementary school. He couldn't stay to help, but he watched our frenzied motion for a moment. If this isn't a metaphor for marriage, I told Tim, I don't know what is. The plan had been to convert the water-hogging south lawn into a drought-tolerant, pollinator-supported flower field. But between a book tour that had me out of town nearly weekly from June to October and the work of overseeing some interior renovations when I was home, most of 2019's planting window had slipped by me. A snowy spring had run straight into blazing heat of summer, then it was fall, and soon the snow would be flying again. What are you going to do about the south lawn? Ray asked several times that summer. He was enthusiastic about the idea of creating a yard with more breath of life than the turf that had come with the house. Like me, he'd read climate reports in The Guardian and the New York Times, dropped into our emails every day. We both knew the catastrophic impact of our local pollinators we both knew the catastrophic impact on local pollinators wrought by decades of American suburban lawn culture. Knowing that sometimes even good ideas overwhelm me until I let them go, he warned, we should get started before it's too late. So we did. We got that this giant delivery of soil, and then had to figure out what to do with it, right? Because it's super windy. Tim ends up calling us, Ray and I, he had to go and get tarps to cover the soil, and then we went to work, and then Tim called us while we were at work and you should come back, the tarps have blown off. And so we had to race back from campus and cover up the things more carefully. A neighbor drove by, Mini Cooper man. When I finally had to, I wanted to thank him, I walked around the neighborhood until I saw the Mini Cooper in the driveway. And delivered us some bricks from his wife's she shed, and it was this community endeavor to repair this spur of the decision choice that I had made to have the soil delivered on a really not good time. And from that moment, and so many moments in the process of recovering and regenerating and honestly rewilding this yard, I've learned so much about what community can mean, right? I go into these things being I just can't look at that grayness anymore. And then all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of people who are with me in the process of making that change. And I've learned about seed swapping, and I've got friends that we share plants, and my neighbors and I talk about what it is that we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And people look out for me, and I can look out for other people. And so from moving from this monochromatic, not particularly life-supporting landscape into this diverse, wild, pretty sometimes crazy space, I've broadened and widened all of my ideas about what community might be, which feels to me to be an awfully political kind of movement, right? Whether a plot in the yard or pots in a window, every politically engaged person should have a garden. By politically engaged, I mean everyone with a vested interest in the direction the people on this planet take in relationship to others. We should all take some time to plant life in the soil, even when such planting isn't easy. Our South Plot's newly exposed surface was as hard and crumbly as the sloughed off parts of an old red brick. Too dense for most plants' delicate roots, the clay seemed dead and unproductive, lacking the organic materials, the microbes and fungi and insects that differentiate useless dirt from what gardeners call soil. The weight of the thick sod had compacted the earth so that water pooled on the surface instead of penetrating. I had to pound my shovel to break through. The clay crusted and cracked and formed rocks the size of Callie's 9-year-old fists. I was going to have to amend the patch, to feed it, aerate it, enhance it if I wanted to welcome new life. Even though this tract of land was accessible, I'd have to work to build a garden. I wanted to work to build a garden. The green of growing things calms me. Plants stabilize me, and I am interested in the patience that is required as I wait for growth. For the politically engaged person, any of us, such patience is a key to survival. Patience is a kindness that carries me through the long days and the longer nights. So, one thing I should tell you about myself is that I'm black. And Fort Collins is not. At the time of writing Soil, the census data said that Fort Collins was like 1.2%. I love this phrase in the official census data, 1.2% African American alone. Which I know that that alone means like racially specific, but also 1.2% can feel kind of alone sometimes. And like as metrics, you know, to help understand what that seems. Anytime my husband goes out cycling, he's a long distance cyclist, and people say, I think I saw you, he's like, you saw me then. You know, like if you think you saw me on the trail, you saw me. That was me. My daughter remains the only black child with 2 black parents in her 780 student middle school. Like that's what we mean, like metrically wise. And like there are so many good things about Fort Collins, and so like okay. But when I set out to decide to create this wild-looking yard, there is always in me this sort of piece of a question of like, are people gonna be like, oh, and also that's gonna happen to the property values, right? Like this question of what sort of difference is too much difference in some communities to become a risk. And so as I set out to think about why I wanted to create this space of native pollinator-friendly low water planting, to me, it was not only an ecological question. It was also a cultural question, a social question, a community question, and a historical question. As I thought about what parts of our landscape have been honored, cultivated, supported, and what those decisions have said about ideas of community identity over time. So I'm going to flip a little bit to the back of the book and read a little bit about the sunflower, which I love. And many of the other plants in this book have taught me about ideas of belonging and being at home and who and how we call a place home. Okay. My daughter and I are from the American West. I love this place. But we no more belong here than Gene Autry, who sang so convincingly about a home on the range while misnaming bison, one of the key drivers of this landscape's current shape. Bison live here. Bison, not buffalo. Cape buffalo or Sincerus kaffir, which have like these swooping helmet horns, or the other buffalo that are on the African continent. The Cape buffalo or the African continent, and then there's a bubulus in South Asia. But as with indigenous American people being labeled Indians, because the Europeans who encountered this hemisphere thought that they had landed in Asia, calling bison buffalo reveals America's often brutal roots in misguided trade. The word buffalo comes from the French word for an animal that produces beef, boeuf. I'm sorry for my French. So violent to name a being, not for how it lives, but for how we consume it. The roaming antelope Autry sang about also don't exist here. Though they resemble gazelles and elands from the African continent's Antilopenae subfamily, the animals we call antelopes are actually pronghorns, a species found exclusively in North America. Pronghorns have lived on this continent in the West since the early Pleistocene. They can run faster than 60 miles an hour, much faster than any living predator found in North America today. Scientists believe that Antilope capria americana developed their astonishing speed to outrun the American cheetah of the extinct genus Myricina. Why did I decide that I needed to write all of the Latin words? When I recorded the audiobook, there was a producer there who with a cue guide for all these things that this geeky girl who just knew it from reading it, all of a sudden had to say it out loud in recording, but I'm just gonna skip it this time. So that American cheetah roamed this continent before the Holocene. The scholar John A. Byers says that that what we see in pronghorns is a modern day behavior responding to ghosts of predators past. And I wanted to read that because I think a lot about the ways that the histories of this space still affect what grows here, how it grows here, how we treat it, so that we're all really sometimes responding to the ghosts of predators past. If from the window in my study, I look around the blue spruce to one of our neighbor's yards, I see a mostly dead cottonwood tree. The tree stands 70 feet tall, and though she still grows some leaves in spring, sending puffs of snowy fluff around the neighborhood each May, all but 2 of her 8 prominent limbs are gray and bare all the year. Through those limbs, I can watch the sunset, as if the fading red light wants nothing more than to be caught up a while and held before disappearing. Before this subdivision, before all these lawns, before the landscapers put in aspen, which prefer thickly clustered groves that lawnmowers and garden pruners prevent, before human-sided junipers and sidewalks, grew rabbit brush and blue grama and fringe sage and milkweed. Near the tributary for which this neighborhood is named grew the West's largest deciduous tree, the cottonwood. Sturdy and steady, even past the prime of her full show of yellow-green flowers. 5 miles east as the crow flies, and close to the interstate that could take us straight up toward Fort Laramie in 2.5 hours, there once stood a cottonwood people here called council tree. That tree lived perhaps 120 years. Even after death, the tree kept counsel another 70. A local Arapaho leader met white settlers under the tree to resolve disputes and barter agreements. The Arapaho also held counsel there among themselves, as did the Ute. Even after the forced removal of the Ute and the Arapaho, whose people lived in this region more than 100 centuries, the tree stood in that place until a fire in the 1950s. In 2008, developers built a shopping center nearby with a Target and a Sprouts and a library and restaurants and a Lowe's and a shoe store and a Sephora and a Staples. The road we used to get there, council tree. History will be kind to me, Winston Churchill said, for I intend to write it. In his essay, My Adventures as a Social Poet, Langston Hughes writes, "Poets who write mostly about love, roses and moonlight, sunsets and snow, must lead a very quiet life. Seldom, I imagine, does their poetry get them into difficulties. Beauty and lyricism are really related to another world, to ivory towers, to your head in the clouds, free floating off the earth." I love those Colorado clouds. Like cotton balls some days, gone the next. Some days gathered near the Front Range peak, so I can't tell where the mountains end and the clouds begin. One thing always leads into another here. The westward expansion had been in full effect for decades before Colorado became a state. Prospectors found gold here, the Guggenheims found silver. Seeking wealth in the region, more and more people from elsewhere arrived. Their arrival introduced more and more broken and annulled treaties, altering and imperiling the lives of more and more of the region's original inhabitants, humans, animals, and plants alike. The size of the territory encompassing what would become Colorado shrank and shrank, each time changing names: Louisiana Territory, Jefferson Territory, Wyoming Territory, Kansas Territory, Colorado Territory. New states squared off around it, officially adding their populations and land masses to the United States. I like to think of my birth state as expansive and welcoming. When it was finally ratified in 1876, lawmen wrote the state's constitution in English, Spanish, and German, offering welcome to many men of European ancestry. But one of the reasons it took so long for Colorado to earn its statehood is that the territorial government repeatedly presented articles of constitution to Congress that withheld from Black men, mulatto men, and Native men the right to vote or serve on a jury. Even after the nation ratified the 13th and 14th Amendments, granting the full rights of citizenship to any man born or naturalized in the United States, 3 times, leaders of the Colorado Territory tried to create a state where men like my husband, my father, Langston Hughes, could serve on no jury, could cast no vote. I am not always sure that I belong in Colorado. Though I have my little plot of land that I love, I am nothing but a settler in this state, and not always a welcome one. I try to reinstate some of the life that the land once knew. Its roses and moonlight, sunsets and snow. In our sunflowers on a mid-August morning, as many as 10 goldfinches perch, nibbling on petals and pistils and seeds. They blend into the foliage. I watch for the sun to catch the rustle of their golden feathers. Sunflowers are native to the American West. They grow wild here. A man who I write about a lot in the book named Thomas Nettle identified 2 different species of sunflowers on his westward tracks. Indigenous people have cultivated sunflowers in this landscape for 4,000 years. Thanks to Van Gogh's paintings and to the mammoth sunflowers of Russia, whose genetic alterations circled back to this continent to help grow the 13-foot tall hybridized beauties in my yard, I thought of Europe when I first saw them. But starting with the Spanish and the French and continuing through Thomas Nettle and his Anglo and Euro-American fellows in the 19th century, people pulled sunflowers like Echinacea and Black-Eyed Susan and Coreopsis from the land here, shipping them to gardens in England and Europe. Bred to have only one large head and concentrate growing energy for a yield of larger seeds, Russian sunflowers differ from Native American versions, whose genes remain strong in my yard. The sunflowers I grow boast many shoots and branches, from which small heads of sunshine bud and blossom from July until the first hard frost. I can't blame anyone for wanting to gather and cultivate in their own gardens species from across the American West. If I ever have to go away from here, I'll be loath to leave these flowers. I was born in Colorado. I think of this place as the place I belong. But this is not true. The cottontail rabbits who live and sometimes die in our yard, they are the natives, though they bear the names of a man from England. Some of the plants that they like best, prairie mallow, wine cups, little blue stems, are natives here too. I hate to think of all who have died here or come to harm so that I could claim this as my home. Some I had a hand in killing, and some deaths, though not by my own hand, I benefit from. Despite everything, I want to set a path towards survival. Despite everything, I want my family, so many of us, to lead a very quiet life. So, I think I want to read a poem, open up a little bit. Got a little dark there. But I think that this is a thing that happens throughout this book, and it's a thing that happens with me as I'm sort of digging in that soil. Like I like see all this possibility and this hope, and then I turn and I see other things that we're working to try to alleviate, to create quiet lives for others. So at one point I asked myself why I was writing a whole book about my garden, and this poem was my answer. Let grow more winter fat, wine cup, western wild rose. So little open prairie left, little waves of blue stem, little fuzzy-tongued penstemon, quieter the golden current, nodding onion, quieter now as well. Only a few clusters of Colorado butterfly plant still yawn into the night. Where there once was prairie, a few remaining fireflies abstract themselves over roads and concrete paths. Prairie wants to stretch full out again and sigh. Purple prairie clover, prairie zinnia, prairie dropseed nodding into solidago. Bee balm brushing rabbit brush. Prairie once. Prairie once, prairie once. So now, how about I answer some questions for a while, and maybe I'll pop back into reading a little bit, and I'll probably close with a poem too before we really end. We have questions already.
I'm going to have Oh, she's grabbing. I have one from your virtual audience tonight.
Hi, virtual audience.
Yeah. When dealing with our clay soil, what is your recipe for added organic matter, type, and sand? Do you remove soil, mix, and add back, or just dig into the soil?
That is a great question. So I started this project in the fall, I guess the fall of 2014, like the first, like when it cooled down again after we've been here for a while. And I started with just a tiny little railroad tie size plot in the grass. So there were railroad ties left over from the old owners, and I just made a square in the yard, and then I made this lasagna method that was supposed to, because the internet told me, it was supposed to kill the grass underneath. And so that was the first plot, and then I also pulled out some of the rock hardscaping around, and that was just like depleted, as I was describing. That rock that I pulled, they were small enough sections that it was just usually topsoil that I got at the hardware store or from some of our local places. As the projects have gotten bigger and bigger, I have done more augmentation, brought in soil from elsewhere. I will say about that, that's a tricky thing. You got to trust your soil provider that you're not then importing whatever they've got in their soil as well. There's no easy answers. If you have the time and the patience, creating your own composting layer, aerating the soil, building that is the way to go. But that takes years, really, for that to develop. So the way that my project happened in patches, you can sort of point to one yard and be like, well, I won't do that again, like that section. But then this part of it I do like. Also, it's what do you put in it, right? Because you're not putting in plants that want really rich, mulchy kind of soil into our clay. You can find plants that are often like, this is fantastic, thank you, I've been waiting for nothing my whole life. And so part of that's been, for me, a big part of the experience is learning what grows where, like literally which corner of the yard will that plant work in. It didn't work there, but it does work there, and patience.
Thank you. This comes from the audience here. Why did you decide to have black and white photographs in this book as opposed to full color photos?
I'm not even sure Simon Schuster would have entertained a full cover. Okay, maybe they would have. If you don't know, throughout the book, I have images, two different kinds of images. One are images that my daughter and my friend Mary Ellen Sanger took in the garden, and the other I sent clippings to a photographic artist named Dion Lee, who is gonna be in the Whitney Biennial this year. Yay, Dion Lee! And she got clippings in my yard, and so she is a black and white, that's her form, is working in black and white art. I met her at a talk, and I said I wanted images in this book, and I didn't know what. I was about to tell you a secret, but there's like 250 people here, so it's not really a secret. So I'll just tell you, I had thought that I wanted pen and ink drawings, and then Amy Nosuke Matado came out with her gorgeous World of Wonders, and she has beautiful pen and ink drawings, and I was like, well, I can't then do that because it'll look like I'm copying her, even if I had the idea first. She published her book first. So then I had to like come up with some other plan, and I was talking to Dion, and she helped me figure it out. But the black and white images that Dion made also feel very timeless because of the technique that she used, and because the book does so much diving into history and moving into my own personal past and the American past. I really kind of liked the way that the black and white photos will always be as they are, where color photos age every 5 years. Our technology and color printing changes, and that would age them in a way that I didn't really want.
Thank you. This person asks, what is the most beautiful moment you've had in your garden?
Oh my goodness, wow. No secrets? Yeah. I mean, one time a Western tanager came. Those are gorgeous. That was happy. And the day that a hummingbird, like the first hummingbird I had ever gotten in the yard, and it came to one of my dahlias, and it was a late blooming dahlia, and then like in came that hummingbird, and that is just, I felt like, I'm doing, that like these birds are coming. They're not coming to the feeders. They're coming to the food, the real food that I've put into this space. And so we really, like, again, this idea of broadening community through growing diverse landscaping. So I think that's it. The moments of welcome, of seeing living beings that I haven't seen elsewhere and I haven't seen in that space, find sanctuary in my yard. Makes me happy.
Okay, this seems to be a common question, Camille. Did you get any pushback from your neighborhood or HOA, or did you get support from the get-go? It seems like many people struggle to get their HOAs on board with lawn removal.
Yeah, that is a very good question, and I was lucky. I was lucky partially because of my tactic. I just started small, and I figured if I started small and just like kept like scope creep, eventually by the time they figured out what I was doing, they would also know that I was right. So that seemed to work because in the time of my doing that work, the HOA wiped their non-standard landscaping prohibition, and the city of Fort Collins has become really, really vocal in their support of xeriscaping and pollinator-friendly gardens and such. So I was lucky. I know I write about it in the book. There's just horrible stories of people having incredible fines, having their yards bulldozed, going into really deep political, legal battles over doing what is right. But luckily the state of Colorado is also on board, and it has legislation that is supportive of people making these kinds of decisions. Because like, this is the water issue, right? Among other things. Like there's the pollinator issue, there's the water issue, there's all these reasons that this is really the only way to go. But I'll also tell you this, which some of you probably know, native gardening is the lazy person's solution to gardening. Because this is such a crazy climate, but it's not crazy. It is what it is. And so if you put the plants that are acclimatized to our weather and our soil and our world and the sun and all the things that are in this place, those plants thrive without my having to be out there doing as much work as I might have to do for some kind of Mediterranean garden up here in the high desert. And so I found that another reason I haven't gotten pushback from my neighbors is that my garden actually looks nice for a long time. And it's pleasant to see. And so once it comes in, because native gardens do have like a really, like, adolescent phase is awkward, right? They have like an awkward phase for sure. Like head braces and so on, pimply and awful. But then like once they get past that, they're lovely longer. And so I think that that's helpful too.
Very good. What project in your garden are you most excited for this year? Also, What will your next book be about?
I'm actually finishing up another book of poetry, which is largely about the intersection between that larger idea of political thinking that I'm talking about, political thinking which has to do with having a vested interest in the direction of the relationships of lives on this planet, and non-human greater than human life and family. So that's the next book that I'm finishing up. Soil will be out in paperback in May, and there's I have a new afterword in it, and there's an extended Q&A also, so I was working on that a lot in the fall. My garden is, the project that I'm in right now is that we've pulled all of the remaining bluegrass and put in buffalo and blue grama, and it's in the awkward phase. So what I'm doing right now is a lot of it is really just, so much of this is just learning how to see differently. Learning how to see beauty differently, learning how to see growth, learning how to gauge patience in a different way. And so I walked out today and I was like, can I do the rototiller and put the seed down yet? But I know all the little critters are still sleeping under the leaves, so I can't do that yet. I gotta hold myself back too.
This is a great question. Do you have a favorite resource to recommend for someone new to gardening who would like to start a garden?
Well, right here in this room, at the back of the room, there are some incredible resources here. I would advise, if you have an opportunity, to go to some of the seed swaps or plant swaps that happen, or the municipal gardens sale that they have Mother's Day weekend. There are a bazillion people there who are happy to tell you what they know about gardening and would be delighted to share information with you. This community actually has an insane number of resources in terms of that. So you can turn to the internet, but I think it's useful to stay here because, again, our climate is so particular. So many things about this place are really unique, that I would be careful about getting your advice too far flung. What works in Alabama isn't going to work in Colorado. And similarly, I would be really careful. This was a cautionary tale that I can tell you. When you start buying plants and buying seed, don't just buy the wildflower packet, because it's not necessarily meant for us. You will sometimes introduce into your garden things that are noxious, aggressive spreaders in our climate that aren't in others. And so just be really mindful. Use your local resources of people who know what works here and what doesn't.
Thank you.
Yes?
I didn't know the question, but I would like to ask, sorry, with disrespect to you. My name is Dr. Guadalupe Salazar, and I have lived in Fort Collins for a very, very long time. And you've mentioned several things. And you mentioned the American past.
Excuse me. Excuse me.
I think they're going to get you a mic so that...
I know. I have so many comments here that I'm going to.
It will be helpful because then I don't have to...
Is that you've mentioned, Camille, and I appreciate you coming here. You mentioned, I better wear my glasses. You mentioned the American past. You mentioned the real estate, historical. You mentioned the community could be. You mentioned the historical question, the cultural question, the environment question, and the healing differently. I've lived in this town for a very long time. I come from a family of migrant workers. So when my father was looking at real estate, he was only allowed to buy in the Buckingham area, which is on 3rd Street. Although we love the soil, we've planted several times, and yet it's been very difficult for the healing process. So as you were talking, there's a lot of things that came to my mind, hurtful things that I resonate with, I reflect with, and yet I said you have an opportunity to educate this audience about this city has never been very welcoming to people of color. Not people that look like me, not people that look like you, and yet, or people of Native American descent. And yet I was wondering, the question is that you had an opportunity. I haven't read your book. I was invited here by the book club, and so I
Thank you, book club.
appreciate to be here. But I said, but we have an opportunity to educate our audience about the hurtful things, the harmful things that the city has done to our people. So and again, I haven't read your book, but we have an opportunity to mention those things in the books that we write about the wrongs that we've done to people of color. And how can we start healing? And planting is great. Because this when my husband committed suicide, and so my father said we need to plant a garden so you can heal. And that's how I began my healing 20-some years ago.
Thank you for sharing all of that. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing all of that. Throughout this book, I write about stories like that. Those stories of redlining, the stories of the reasons and the ways that systemic, both cultural and legal segregatory practices have really changed who can feel at home in these landscapes. The reason why I have an additional piece second guessing myself when I go against code and decide to do something in my yard, because I mean, I'm just lucky to be a black person allowed to own a putting, right? Like, based on the history of American real estate practices. So I write about that. I write about my own family's history of that kind of treatment and larger questions specifically related to Indigenous American and Black American cultural histories. And I think that there is no way to adequately and completely move towards a productive, healing, positive forward motion in our relationship with the land without conscious, careful, attuned awareness of history and our cultural pasts, right? And I know that this is a country, this may not be a community, but this is a country that tends to not like to think about the past very much, and certainly doesn't like to talk about the hard parts of it, the brutal parts of it, the violences that have been done one to another. But I think of this, there's no way for me, I'm the daughter of a physician, there's no way to actually repair a trauma without knowing what the trauma was, without seeing it, acknowledging that trauma, incorporating the facts of that trauma into the healing choices, right? And so to me, this sort of intersection between social justice and environmental justice it says a lot about where people are in this town now, still to this day, right? Where are certain communities living and why? It says a lot about which people have the freedom to make choices about what they grow and don't. There's a moment in the book, relatively early on, where my daughter and I were just out. We were just out having a good time. I just was like outside, having a nice time. It was early in spring, a lot of dandelions, so I thought, well, we could have a nice time and you could pick the dandelions. We needed to have like a 2-for-1 thing. And she was having a really great time. We were like having a little race, and she was like, I wonder if this is how they used to do it in the olden days. And I was like, well, in slavery times, like I just like went all the way there. And she was like, I just kind of meant 1940, you know, like, it was like, she was not going there. But to me, there was no, like, I really needed to talk to my daughter about the fact that we were having fun, and this was like a joyful experience, but there would have been children, still are children, who don't get to make those kinds of decisions. And so every time I make a decision about what I do in my yard, I'm making that decision with an awareness that I have that liberty, and I don't take it lightly. And so I do, as I think you're saying, I use this book as an opportunity to share that kind of complexity as I'm talking about just gardening, but also how simple acts like gardening, like cooking, like sewing, like childcare, all of these things, these simple acts that we do in our daily lives really reflect who we are, who we want to be, and who we've been allowed to be in our past. That was a big question. So, all right. What do we think? Maybe 2 more questions? I don't know where we are for time.
This goes along with the current theme. Could you please provide 3 ways to help uplift the BIPOC community? Maybe 1.
Okay, so I'm always interested in a question like that because I want to know if that question is coming from inside the BIPOC community or outside the BIPOC community. And we don't know. So I'm going to give you 2 ways because those are different. The answers are in some ways different. If this is a question from outside, the answer is to be quiet and listen. Don't get defensive. You're going to hear things that are hard. You're going to hear things and wonder, is that me? Did I do that? And maybe yes, sometimes, maybe not you, but just listen. Be still and listen. If we're thinking about this in terms of like plant life, right? There's like, you can plant a plant and it may look like it's not doing anything and you have all the answers and the ways to fix it, but it just needs to sink into the soil for a little bit and it will do its thing, right? If you just listen to the plant, just listen. For members of the BIPOC community, it's about learning to feel comfortable speaking the truth in places that sometimes you have to say, stop, be quiet, and listen, right? So it's this kind of pushback sometimes of wanting to speak truth to communities that for whatever reason sometimes can't hear or don't want to hear. As I was working on revising this book, I had a few crises of faith where I thought, I'm writing a book about race, in a super white community that I call my own, but which I will sometimes be like, I'm deeply uncomfortable in these particular moments or these particular interactions, and I don't know what my community will say. And I can think of 2 walks that I took with white women who were dear friends of mine who told me, if you need to tell this, I need to listen. And I may not want to hear it right away. It may be hard, but I need to hear that. And you need to trust that a community who cares for you will be willing to listen. And so that's the two-sidedness. I need to trust that I can tell my truth, and I need to trust that you'll be able to listen. And that's really it, right? Once we start there, we can go a lot of places.
I have a parting comment I'd like to share. This was from our virtual audience. This individual expresses an appreciation for your experiences as a Black woman, mother, neighbor, and steward of the native land, beautifully woven into a tapestry of an ecological poetry. Thank you for sharing your story in your way. Your book is so transformative.
Oh, well, thank you so much. So, can I read one last poem before we end? And I'll tell you just a little piece. This is like, we're in 2020. I left out all the part about a lot of the part about the mothering stuff in the reading because I wanted to kind of focus on Northern Colorado a little bit more. But a lot of this book, as I said, was written during the pandemic, like the height of the pandemic. I was home. I was supposed to write a book about my garden, and but it was not going to be this book. And then the pandemic changed so much of so many things about how, and 2020 in general. And so in the midst of all that just yuck that was happening over and over and over again, I was watching this garden start to grow, and that gave me a kind of peace. And my husband found his peace from reading the Trail Ridge Road clearing reports. So every morning before he opened the news, he would tell me the situation up on Trail Ridge Road. And the beauty of the living world is that it is full of realities that are facts and also really amazing metaphors for the human heart. In her mostly white town, an hour from Rocky Mountain National Park, a Black poet considers centuries of protests against racialized violence. 2 miles into the sky, the snow builds a mountain unto itself. Some drifts can be 30 feet high. Picture a house, then bury it. Plows come from both ends of the road, foot by foot, month by month. This year, they didn't meet in the middle until mid-June. Maybe I'm not expressing this well. Every year, snow erases the highest road. We must start near the bottom and plow toward each other again.
We're going to say goodnight to our virtual friends. Bye, everyone.
But Old Firehouse Books would be happy to get you a copy of Soil. Virtual friends.
Virtual friends. Camille will be sticking around to sign some books. She'll be at this table back here. Be aware of the number of you and respectful so everybody can get a turn. And thank you again very much.
Thank you, everybody.